Okay, welcome to 1000 Ways to be a Champion for Children. My name is Alan Friesen. We're going to have us a great discussion today about reducing the impact of adverse childhood experiences. My guests today are Ralph Zentner and Eva Cool, and they're going to talk to us about grief and loss and death, and talking to little people about those kind of concepts. So thank you very much for joining us, Ralph and Eva. Appreciate that. So Ralph, you were just telling us about where, because of your close relationships with people in our community, that even though maybe you're trying to dial back a little on the work, people call you at home and said, we've suffered a loss, Ralph, can you help us?
Yeah, for sure. I'm quite honored that the connections, the families that I've met in the past, call me back because they trust me because we're there at one of the most darkest hours. And so when I get that call, and sometimes it's in the middle of the night, you have to respond and be there. And as much as I like to slow down a bit and enjoy a bit of life, I always want to be there for the people that want to call upon me, and so I can help and serve them.
Yeah, and when you think about it, you said you're honored, and I can understand why. At a time when people are having, maybe the toughest circumstance in their life, they look for somebody to call to help, and they think of Ralph. They call Ralph. That's
Very,
cool.
very honored for sure. And I've been through some terrible, darkest hours with people. And if I'm a shoulder or someone that they can lean on or talk to, I want to be that person, no matter how old I get or where I'm at. I still want to support. And I've been on vacations, and people still call me, and I can do what I can from a distance. But I've flown back to help families that I know and love.
Yeah, yeah. And there is no one way. There's 1,000 ways that people grieve. There's not one way, right? Like it's not the same process for everybody, right?
It is not. No, your religious beliefs, how you interact with your family, the love that you had for the person that passed away are all key factors in the grieving cycle.
Yeah, no, I can certainly see that, and quite a variance in terms of just the practice or the service that's delivered in the manner in which it's delivered based on differences in culture or differences in religious beliefs as well, right? There's a lot of I'm going to call it customization, but to make it work for that family and that culture and their whole perspective on life and death. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And Eva, maybe you can jump in on this one as well. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that there isn't two grief journeys that are the same. A lot of times we will get this idea that, oh, if you have lost a spouse, for example, or if you have lost a child, that you can then say to someone, oh, I understand what you're going through. And in theory, that may be true, but you can't really, because the same way that each individual relationship is unique, in that same way, each individual loss is unique. So you may have lost a child and it could feel very different to you than somebody else that has lost a child. It all depends on everything surrounding it, right? So I always say that each individual loss is sacred and unique, and there really is no comparison. There can't be, just because it's relationships are unique, and then loss and death is unique in the same way.
And I believe, if I understand the process correctly, Cornerstone, Ralph's company, Cornerstone, would then pays for you to have some grief counseling for every family that they assist with their services. That's kind of how it works, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, Cornerstone has brought me on, and so I do support sessions, and in conjunction with other services that they offer as well. So the first session is on Cornerstone. They take care of that. They pay me for the first session, and then after that, for individuals that continue to work with me, or I continue to work with them, then it's directly to me.
Right. Yeah. So do you really have much interaction directly with the little people surrounding funerals? Probably not, right? I mean, you're dealing with the parents, and they're grieving, and they're trying to be of value or support to the little people that are part of that equation or part of that event. So you wouldn't really have a whole bunch of direct contact with kids and talking to them about grief, or would you?
I haven't directly since I've had this partnership with Cornerstone, but I have a very personal experience in loss and children. So I do this work because of what life has been like for me. And so my first experience with death was actually my oldest sister died in a car accident, and she left behind 4 kids under the age of 9 and her husband. And so just with how the events played out, I was actually the one. 2 of the kids were with her, and so they were transported to Lethbridge Hospital via ambulance, but her oldest 2 kids were in school when she had the car accident. And just with how it played out, I was actually the one that went to the school to pick up the oldest 2, and the one that told them that their mom had died. So it's I will never forget that moment. But talking about children and grief, there is a lot. It is different than adults going through grief, but at the same time, there is a lot of methods that apply for children that would apply for adults as well. So, for example, adults that are unfamiliar and uncomfortable with loss and uncomfortable going through a loss will in turn project that onto children and make it uncomfortable for the children. I mean, it's an uncomfortable thing to go through, but there is things that you can do to make it a time for connection. And it just depending on how you approach it will shape that whole journey, right? And so a lot of the methods that you apply to adults would also apply to children, just in a dialed down tone from my perspective.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Wow, that must have been a tough part of your life there with your sister passing away, and then you're trying to meet the needs of those 4 little ones. Wow.
Yeah, that was, I always say that was my first experience, and it really shaped why I do what I do now. And Alan, you probably don't know this. I don't know if Ralph even knows this, but so I grew up in the Low German Mennonite community. So my maiden name was Clausen. And so in that community, death is viewed very different. And so we touched on this a little bit. How religion and culture plays into how you process and how you go through a loss. And so in that community specifically, from my experience, you don't talk about it. So somebody dies and they're gone. There's actually a belief that if you talk about them after they have passed, you are disturbing their rest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so there was very specific religious rules or sort of traditions around death. For example, you never go to a funeral, regardless of how the body looks, where it's closed casket. So that really shaped, and I went through that death experience and watching the kids and just everybody in my family go through that, and I just said, something's really wrong here. Like, this is so inhumane and it's so hard, and this is going to break so many individuals for the rest of their lives because of how this is being processed. And so that really shaped how why I do what I do today, and also how I go through it with other individuals. But in relation to the kids specifically, so that was my first experience. So would I do it differently now? Probably. But I do remember, I mean, I'll never forget this. I went to the school to pick them up, and they called them out of the classroom, and I was in the hallway, and I got down to their level. And it's one of those moments that you just remember exactly what it felt like. And I'm getting goosebumps even just thinking about it now. But I got down to their level, and they could see that something was wrong. And I just said, life isn't going to be the same anymore. Your mom was in a car accident and she's died. And just that, to somebody that feels uncomfortable with death, they may say, well, that's super harsh, and maybe use other language with children. But it's actually, and maybe it was just my instinct, I didn't want to sugarcoat it, but it is actually really important to use very clear-cut language with children. So because children, they don't really understand the permanence of forever. And so to sort of sugarcoat it sort of negates the reality of what has actually happened. So to use words like, they've gone to a better place, like that may seem like a good idea in theory, and saying that is fine, but also to make sure that they understand the permanence of it. Because if they don't, then every time you're reminding them, no, this is forever, it's sort of like they're reliving that trauma of, oh, well, I didn't realize that this is forever, right? So to use words like they have died, instead of that sugarcoating aspect of it. But yeah, so going back, like it's definitely an experience that I'll never forget.
Wow. I'm Mennonite. How come I don't understand these things about Mennonite funerals? I wasn't paying attention apparently. So
no, well, it depends on what church, right? So I came from a very conservative. So depending on you're probably more of the liberal Mennonite.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Ralph, did you have anything else to add about having these conversations with little people?
I think Eva is right on of being plain language, involving them in what's going on, explaining it very clearly. And we've got many brochures that we have at the funeral home that explains things, like even something like cremation. I still recall vividly a funeral of a parents with some young children, and it was cremation. And as we're walking into the church with an urn, this little 7 or 8 year old looked up and said, "Is my mom's head in there?" She didn't understand the concept of cremation because no one explained it to them.
Yeah,
so, involving them in what's going on, they're very inquisitive. And, to talk to them on, like Eva says, someone died. They didn't go to sleep. They're not gone to a better place. They might have gone to a better place, but for a child, they don't understand that better place yet.
Right.
So for us, it really is talking plain language. And, I'm really proud of some of the things that we have at the funeral home. I have a coloring book that little children can sit, and it walks them through the funeral. What happens at a funeral? What's going to go on? And these are things that I would give crayons and this coloring book to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and they can sit down. And what sometimes us adults can't explain, this will help them to understand.
The process. Yeah. Can you stay in the lines when you're coloring, Ralph?
Well, I haven't colored it myself, but
sorry. Back to being about direct, like where you're saying, like, I can understand what you're saying. Going to another place to the child might mean, oh, well, she's coming back someday. She's, this is right. That I can understand that. And it kind of, John Thompson from Lethbridge Family Services and I were chatting about suicide prevention. And with suicide prevention, somebody says they're suicidal. And the right thing to do is to ask the question, have you made any plans? How are you planning on committing suicide? To ask those questions. And you'd think this would be the wrong thing to do, but that's the right way to do, to kind of get them to kind of process what's the next step and what's the next step. And does this make sense? Right. Or anyways, that's the way. And to me, it sounded terrible, but in the end, I can see where that would be of value if you were suicidal. So, yes.
Yeah, I think overall, we have this idea that talking about something prevents it from, or not talking about something prevents it from happening or makes it better. And it's the opposite. Yeah. Talking about something, discussing it, being open and honest and vulnerable about whatever issue it is in life is what shapes it, right? So silence and beating around the bush is not the answer in any situation in life, and definitely not in death either. So the other aspect of it is for children, if you're able to specifically in very plain language, talk about what happened. So for example, if there's a heart attack, and for you to say, they fell and stopped breathing, or like very clear that they're able to just wrap their little minds around it, right? I was just thinking of that, even in regards to what happened. It's not to say that you need to go into the gory details of that can be traumatizing, but for like very clear language as to what happened. And then that also creates a space for children to come back if they have questions, for them to come back to say, okay, well, you said that they stopped breathing, for them then to be able to come back and to say, like, what does that mean? So then you say, okay, well, do you feel that pulse? Like, that's your heartbeat. And when they fell and the heart stopped working, that pulse stopped, right? Those are things that children can wrap their minds around that. And we need that in order to keep breathing. Those are the kind of conversations that children can wrap their minds around.
Cool. Yeah, that's very interesting, and it makes sense. Yeah. For adverse childhood experiences, and certainly losing a parent is one of them when you're a young person, right? Adverse childhood experiences, many times the child believes somehow, even if it's where they're being abused or sexually abused, they believe somehow it's their fault, that they caused that, right? They weren't good enough, or for whatever reason, they were the cause of that. And if they keep that belief for the rest of their life, obviously it's kind of a limiting belief for them, something that says you're not worthy, you're not a good person, if they think that they caused that kind of action. Does it ever happen where kids believe that they caused the death of somebody close to them? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to touch on this first, Ralph. I feel like I've done a lot of talking.
No, you're actually doing good. The grief cycle involves many facets, and part of it is guilt. Some of it can be anger. There is parts that most grieving cycles will go through, and some people carry that for a very long time, whether they had anything to do with the death or not. Sometimes they feel that if I would have done something, she or he wouldn't have passed away.
Right.
And that guilt can last for a very long time, sometimes a lifetime. And if people don't talk to people like Eva, someone to actually walk them through and understand it's not their fault.
Right.
And sometimes bad things happen,
Yeah.
is super important.
Right.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that. I'll share with you an experience that I recently had with an individual who had lost a child via suicide. And so the parent came to me, and in that situation, you definitely, when someone dies by suicide, those questions of guilt and should I have done this, or is it my fault? Like, those questions are very common. They're generally common in any loss, but specifically there. And I went through this process with her, and so there is this notion, especially in a parent-child relationship, that parents are responsible for a child's life. And I walked through this with her, that is actually an unrealistic expectation. So as parents, any parent you would talk to, they would probably say, I am responsible for my child's life. So, and that is an unrealistic expectation where a lot of guilt can come from if you then lose a child by suicide. Because at the end of the day, being responsible for someone's life would mean you are responsible to keep them breathing. You are responsible as a parent. You are responsible to take care of your children, to love them, to nourish them, and to a certain age, to prevent them from harming themselves, right? But nobody else, you as an individual human being, you cannot be responsible for someone else's breath. Right? And so I walked through this with this individual to say, your child's breath was not your responsibility. And that releases that guilt of that I should have, would have, could have, all of this, right? Because, and regardless of whether you're religious or not, everyone's breath it just can't be anybody's responsibility, right? And so, that is it was just life-changing for this individual to release that responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. And especially in children, I think it's fairly simple for us to say that a child has a connection to a parent, regardless of what the relationship is, that you always, in sort of in a roundabout way, feel responsible for your parents' happiness, right? Even though that's a bit ridiculous to think for children, but somehow you always think, if I do this, if I do that, then my parents will be happy, and then in turn I am happy. It's sort of this natural thing that comes with children. So then when you lose a parent, absolutely there comes this, like, for children as well, right? And so even within that communication and very clearly being able to openly discuss what happened. And so an example would be, say a father works away from home to provide for the family and dies while he's working away from home to provide for the family. And then the child hears that the father has passed away. And through the course of this child's life, he's heard that the child works away from home, or the father works away from home because he wants to provide food, a house, for you to go to hockey, all of these things. This is why the father works away from home and does what he does in order to provide this for you, right? And then he dies doing this. And then the child thinks, well, if I wasn't playing hockey and I didn't eat so much, I didn't have these needs, then perhaps my father wouldn't have passed away doing what he did, right? And so then a child can take that through their entire life and believe that they are. And then over the years, it just builds into a complete story of, I am no good, and I this entire identity around what happened. Whereas in that situation, if you can break it down and then say, completely break it down and say it wasn't your fault, and that is the normal, thing for an adult to work to provide for their family, and a father, all of that, to be able to break it down. But in a lot of situations, unfortunately, that conversation never happens, and that's where you talk about that trauma. They'll carry that trauma through their entire lives, and it'll shape their into their adulthood, who they are as a person.
Yeah, definitely, because that's the most damaging type belief, a belief when a little person is a child, that somehow they are worthless or helpless or hopeless, or that somehow they caused somebody they love to die, as an example, or they caused drama in their house, whatever, the one parent is beating on another parent, or whatever the dynamics are of that house. They know, they know that, like, even if people are sad because they're having a problem, not a problem, they're working through their grief and their normal process. The kids know that everybody's sad. This is not a big surprise. But if they say it belongs to me, I caused it, and they keep that belief for the next, 5 decades, it's going to impair their enjoyment of life as well, right? I'm not saying it's not be heartless. It is having the direct conversation, as you were saying, and the parents who would have those direct conversations would be in a better place if they have little people in that household still, to be able to be of value to those little people as well, right? If they're in a better place themselves, that they're handling the grief as healthily as they can. Healthfully, is that a word even? I'm just making stuff up now. But anyways, that, I think that makes sense, right? If the parents get the help that they can deal with their grief in as healthy a manner as possible, then that gives them the capacity to be there for those children as best as they can be, right? So, I mean, nobody likes talking about death, but it happens, and you got to have those conversations, right? So.
Yeah, I actually do. I'm an anomaly. I have the most deepest conversations and just riveting conversations around death. So you can talk to me about death any day.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Have you thought about your death quite a bit?
I have, yeah. And I have no fear of dying myself. And another thing, so I just shared one experience of my sister passing away. But I have, aside from that, I've experienced a significant loss outside of that as well. And so I actually, because of that, what happened is I, for a while, lived in crippling anxiety that everybody around me was going to die.
Sure.
Because in the second car accident in my family, I actually lost my mom, my dad, my brother, and his 3 kids. So there were 6 of them in one car accident. Yeah.
Do you drive still?
This is so funny. And this is what I mean about, we actually, as a family, we joke. And for a while after my mom and dad's accident, there was a few of my siblings, we'd always say, which one of you is next?
Yeah.
But at that point, you have to joke about it because it's just, it can be all consuming, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyways, for a while there, I was just crippled with anxiety. And then so what I do now, you saw my daughter, she's 9, and anybody that's close to me, I have a process that I go through where I release them. So, and this works whether you're a believer or, you know, whatever your religion is, but you release them. And so some people may say that you then would still live in fear. And so, but this release, what it does is it helps me live in gratitude. And
you release the people who have passed. That's who you release.
I release anybody that's close to me that I'm scared to lose.
Oh, okay. Oh. So your 9-year-old daughter, you've released her, which means what?
So I will explain. So I guess in a sense, I release them. So it's a bit of a process where I journal. So I would write it out. So in the beginning, when this fear and this anxiety would constantly come up, I would write it out. I would say, you know, I'm afraid to lose my daughter. I'm afraid of the ways she may die and what life would be like after, you know, and so essentially I write out my fears, and then I write out also, like, you know, her breath is not my responsibility. And if she wasn't here, what would I do? And so I just make it all very real. So it's a bit of a process where, and then I write out, I release you, your breath is not my responsibility. But the biggest thing that I have done, and that I do on a daily basis, is I go through life looking through the lens of death. So, and what that does, and I say that to people and they're like, well, you're crazy. Doesn't that just make you scared and fearful all the time? And it's exactly the opposite. What it does, it helps me live in gratitude with everybody that I'm around, right? So for example, every morning, and this has 100% shaped my relationship with my daughter, specifically, every morning I wake up, I recognize that she is still with me, and that is an honor. And then I write out the things that I'm grateful for in that moment, including her. And so what that does, it completely shifts how you go through your day.
Sure.
Little things don't matter, you know, you're always like, okay. So yeah, looking looking at life through the lens of death is what that's done for me.
Oh, so has your daughter released you as well? I mean, if things go as they're supposed to, you're going to die first. So how's your daughter has she released you?
Well, I have a lot of conversations about death with her. And so there's one thing that I always say, there's one job that we have as parents, and it is to teach our children how to live without us. And so we have conversations, and because death is, I mean, right now I meet individuals in my home. This is actually my session room. And so sometimes she's home, and so she'll be on the computer or whatever while someone comes in. And I will tell her, you know, I'm meeting with someone, they've lost someone. And so she's surrounded by death all the time, by the topic of death, right? And so sometimes at night when she goes to bed, she'll say, you know, Mom, I'm scared of losing you, or what happens if you die? And I said, and I will have that conversation again, very directly. Okay, so you know that my parents died, right? Yeah, that's right. And am I okay right now? And she'll say, yeah, you're very okay, Mom. And I say, okay, do you want to know what it took for me to be okay? So then, like, I will walk through like the choices that you can make for you to be okay after you lose someone. And then some people may think this is a little bit far, but I would absolutely encourage it, where I encourage her to imagine her life without me. And I actually encourage that for everybody, because this is what happens. We live life as if what we have today, we're always going to have. So we have this foundation underneath us that we think is solid, and it's never going to be shaken. The reality is that that's not
going to happen.
No. So then when that rug gets pulled, that foundation gets pulled out from underneath you, if you have never even allowed that thought to cross your mind that what you had was not permanent, the ability to continue to function diminishes.
Sure.
because
Yeah.
and the time it takes for you to pull yourself back together, right? So I go through this with my daughter, where she then imagines her life without me. And sometimes she'll actually, she will get a bit emotional, but then I'll say, like, imagine, some joys. And it's not that you're going to be excited that I'm gone, but I just want you to be able to already have the ability to think of life outside of me. Right. And so that's why I think the biggest job that we have as parents is to teach our children how to be able to live without us.
Nice. That's great. Ralph, you got anything to add there?
Wow, that was quite a bit, Eva. Holy. I don't think I've had a conversation with my 10-year-old grandson quite to that level, but it probably is wise words to prepare the next generation to live without, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without us. And I guess we all anticipate that our grandparents and our parents are going to die, but rarely our children. And so to prepare them for the eventual loss of all of us is so important. You got it.
Yeah. Well, especially, by the way, was that one of the key insights for you, Eva, that allowed you to get over that crippling anxiety that you experienced, first of all? Is that a key insight, or what were the other steps that helped you along that process?
Well, I don't share this story often. I am in the process of writing a book, but I'll share it here just because I feel like it kind of plays into why I am passionate about that belief of imagining your life before that. And I think this really helped me. So it was a bit of a preparation, and it's a bit crazy. It might be a bit crazy, but I'll share it anyway.
Let's hear it. Now I'm really excited. Okay.
Okay. So this is a prep that I had that I believe gave me an advantage after losing my parents, and also helped me sort of release that anxiety. But so growing up Low German Mennonite, I actually married a non-Mennoniter, a Cool, which is where my Cool last name comes from. But anyways, my parents really struggled with that. And so there was disagreements between myself and my parents. And they lived out in Purple Springs. And so we were preparing for our wedding, and one day driving home, and I had a disagreement with my dad, and I was really frustrated. And I was driving home, and I was just sort of, mulling it over in my head. And this is where it gets crazy. I heard an audible voice say, "Do not let this one day get in between the relationship with your parents, because both of them are going to die in a car accident."
Wow.
I know it's crazy. And so I only told one person, my fiance at the time, and he said, "You're crazy. Get help." Something's wrong here. I think he really, really was rethinking this idea of going through with the wedding. But and that was 6 months before they died in a car accident.
Really? Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Yeah.
So I told him, and so when my parents had their car accident, I was actually in Israel. And long story short, he was the one that called me. And when he finally got a hold of me, he just said, "Hey, do you remember what you heard? And I thought you were crazy." He said, "Yeah, it's happened."
Wow. Okay, I got to interject a story. Have you ever heard of the book A Course in Miracles?
No.
Oh man, I found this out recently, and this book is really, really dense. It's really, really hard to read, but it's fascinating because the story behind it is just as valuable as the book. There's these two psychiatrists in California in the 70s. And they don't really get along that much, but they're working together in an office in a university. And the one gal, there's a female psychiatrist and the male psychiatrist. The female psychiatrist starts having these like visions and people talking to her that she is supposed to be the scribe to write this book. So she's a psychiatrist. She goes and talks to her fellow psychiatrist and says, "Yeah, I'm not sure what to do about this." And he encourages her, "Start writing it down. you're being told something, write it down, right? So anyways, this process happens, and this is like 1977, I think it is. So this is all writing it out on foolscap, right? Like not typing it into a computer, writing out in foolscap. And then she'd bring it in every day, and her pages and notes that she would, had been inspired to write, give it to her colleague. Her colleague types it all out. And then, 12 years later, they published this book, of course, in Miracles. And so it's been around since, 40 years or whatever now. But, it's just the process behind it, which there's this collective unconsciousness, there's this whatever it is, this I believe a what would you call it, a universe that favors us, a universe that is looking out for our best interests. So this is a friendly universe is what I believe it to be. But anyways, in here, this is what she put all this stuff down, and the book is amazing. It's a slow read. We read it when we're driving together, and then I read the stuff, and then we talk about it. So that's kind of the process we follow. So, and it's a lot of fun. It's going to probably take me 5 years to read that book. But anyways, I'm really enjoying it. So, yeah. So, so for you, that was a comfort that everything's on track kind of a thing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what that did, one, it made me realize clearly there's a bigger picture at play here. And also it was a bit of a prep. And so that ties into why I believe, not everybody is going to hear or experience what I experienced, but why I believe that imagining your life without your loved ones is sort of can be a really healthy experience for you to help you to live in the present, but also if something were to happen for you to then be able to pick yourself up and continue living. But yeah, I would say as far as your question about how I sort of worked through that anxiety, there's a lot of things there, but one, because I went through essentially a decade of trauma, I took the next 3 to 5 years just working through that, and that's a whole nother topic, but there's a lot of different aspects to just working through that step by step.
Yeah, sure, you bet. So Ralph, you have been an ally for thousands, would that be a fair number, thousands of families, I'm going to say, in your career?
Oh, Alan, probably 20,000.
20,000? Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. 20,000. So with that's got to be at times you found kind of wore down with that work, or discouraged with that work, right? So what for you kind of keeps you or kept you in a state where you could be at your best, be the best Ralph Zentner there is? What did that?
That's a challenging question, but Alan, I part of my profession is to help people through a terrible loss. Some losses are more terrible than others.
Sure.
And, for me, when we have one of those really challenging deaths, we have great resources within the funeral home. And Eva is one that can help our families as well as our staff. But among our staff and our spouses and people that we are companions to, to have that ability just to have a sounding board and sometimes just talk and release some of those feelings you have about a friend of yours that just lost a child. And I've had many of those occasions that I carry with me till the day I die, because I'll never forget them. And, but I also realized I was there to help them through that time. And I wanted to bring up something that I feel is really important. Eva and I are kind of second and third and fourth professionals when there's a loss. One group that I'm really proud that we're involved with is victim services from the police. We have given tours and helped the volunteers that go to the scenes where there's a death to talk to the families, the children, and tell them what's going on and what's happening, and to listen. And we've been involved with victim services for a decade now, where we help to train their volunteers of what we do, what we see after the death, to help the families prepare what's going to come. Yeah. And I just feel that there's great resources in our community to help everybody that's going to reach out and ask for them.
You bet. The folks with the victim services, I got to tell you, that's kind of what engaged me in the whole topic of working on adverse childhood experiences. I'm involved with the RCMP victim services, not in the
Awesome.
important role, the advocate type role, in like writing checks and getting money and stuff like that. That's my job. But the advocates, I have a tremendous respect for what they do because they're front and center. They're the first people, a lot of times these people are seeing to have this worst day of their life type of experience, right?
Absolutely.
And what they taught me, the statistics that we had for victim services work back in the day when we first started the unit, which I've been involved with it since 1995, it was mostly like notification of next of kin. Gee, Mary, I'm sorry, Bill died, and here's the victim services people, and they make arrangements and away you go. But for the last, I don't know, 2 years, the first thing is child sexual assault, and the next is child abuse, like physical abuse and sexual abuse. Number 1 and number 2. And we're like 2.5 times the national average here. We're number 1 in intimate partner violence for all of Canada. Like we're at the highest level. So those type things are what kind of sort of got me involved, and I learned that from victim services because they're involved in those heartbreaking type situations as well. And so the thought process here, if we could reduce that trauma that kids experience, then they're going to have a way better shot at a way better life, right? Is kind of the thought process behind it. And all of us have had trauma. Eva's had way more than her share with her young years, that's for sure. But all of us had trauma, and the trauma we've had when we were a child. Again, if we believed somehow that was our fault and we keep that belief for the rest of our life, then we have a thought process that, we're not enough, we're a shitty human being, right? And if we can address that, we can all have better lives. And I'm not talking small trauma like you skin your knee when you're learning to ride a bike. I'm talking about serious, more trauma, right? So.
And you were involved with suicide prevention, Ellen?
Well, I learned a lot with it just because of working with Lethbridge Family Services and especially with John Thompson. And so through the Victim Services Unit, again, I often take some update, ongoing education type courses and such like that with the advocates just so I can stay current. And suicide prevention, of course, is a big deal, right? Suicide prevention and what you say and how you say it and what kind of value you can be. I think that's again, who wants to have that conversation, right? Like you're talking to a friend and they tell you they're suicidal. It's like, but you can certainly be of value just by being present with that person. One thing I love about Eva's, Eva's philosophy there that she has about, that you kind of decide in advance how you could live without that person kind of a thing is the gratitude, right? I mean, you wake up in the morning and say, hey, my daughter's still here. Hallelujah, right? This is, I'm going to give her an extra kiss and a hug. This is great news, right? So, I can certainly understand just that change in perception that makes that, so much increases the value of gratitude, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to say about gratitude. What was it? Got on a roll there. Something else I was going to say about Eva's thought there. What was it now? So I love that about kind of where you go through that process. And I can see that it's really valuable that way also to kind of set in your mind, you've kind of thought through that if this terrible thing happened, if Eva lost her daughter, that you'd still be able to survive, kind of what the process would be, right? And same vice versa at the point that hopefully it works like it's supposed to and your daughter loses you first. That's the way it should be, hopefully. And then when that happens, that your daughter's thought through that process. Well, you know what? Mom taught me how to work with this, right? How I'm going to move on from here. So, yeah.
Yeah, and from my perspective in myself and in my family and also in other individuals that I've come across, it sort of bypasses you that stage because a lot of times when you experience that loss, the initial stage is of I just cannot go on. Like, that is a very literal feeling. Like I cannot get up in the morning, I cannot keep breathing, and I cannot continue to eat. Life cannot go on. So what that does, it's sort of, it's not, you may still feel that, but because again, our brain is programmable, right? So you've already programmed that in there. So you may still have those initial thoughts, but the likelihood of you sinking into those and staying there is then a lot less, right? Because you've already programmed your mind, and for you to be able to come out of that, right? And so that's why, and I see that. It's one of the first questions, or not necessarily the first, but it's definitely a question that I will ask in almost all of my sessions is, did you ever think that you would lose the person you've lost? Did you ever think that? And the answer 99% of the time is no, right? And I'm passionate about, and this is why I said I love talking about death, but I'm passionate just about changing how society views death, because it's really odd. It's something that all of us will experience at one way or another at one point in our lives, and I think that it doesn't get talked about enough, and that the lack of conversations that happen around it is detrimental to our children, to ourselves. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, all aspects of death, the stronger we can be as individuals in going through that and continue to live after a loss, right?
Yeah, no, makes really good sense to me. Yeah, because I mean, as you said, we're all going to die. So thinking that process that allows you to increase the gratitude for today. A song that I really like is by Paul Thorne. It's I'm still here. His neighbor dies, he's still here, so he's celebrating that. Whoo! I made another day, right? But I think that's true. There's people my age. I look in the abyss. Oh shit! I don't. So yeah, sorry, not going to talk to him anymore, unfortunately. And then, well, I'm still here, and that's good. That's a reason to celebrate, anyways. And it's great that you are aware of that. And then also that you think it's that you recognize it's a normal process. This is part of the deal, right? So, yeah.
It's interesting, Alan and Eva, that every day I advertise and I talk on the radio or a newspaper about prearranging one's funeral. And there's still some cultures and people that absolutely refuse to talk about death because it's still taboo.
Oh, yes.
And, for us, it's a conversation. It's like, what do you want?
Yes.
And, it's a big part of our business.
Yeah.
Makes people to, tell us your wishes before you die.
Right.
Yeah.
Which kind of even speaks to Eva's thing about the conversation she's had with her daughter, right?
Oh,
that while you're not under this trauma, while you're not under this grief, you're having this thought process, right? Like Dr. Bruce Perry, he's like the expert on child development. And he talks about when you're in a state of trauma, you're operating from your brainstem, right? Your neocortex isn't doing any work because you're here, right? But if you, when you're not in a trauma state, have had that thought process, same as if you're prearranging for a funeral, right? You've thought this through, then it's at a much more logical, using the best part of your brain that has all the executive function and the ability to intuit and the ability to imagine and the ability, all those, the human superhuman, or not human, the human capacities that animals don't have, that we have those things, then that allows you to come up to have kind of program your mind that when that happens, you're going to be in a much better place to be able to deal with that. So
you know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. Got a lot more comfortable with that. So yeah, cool. So you're writing this book, Eva.
Yes, I am one of those people that I'm so passionate about so many things that there's not enough hours in my day. But I have started, and it's not an easy book to write. I have started, but it's not on the top of the list of my current projects. I have a lot of ongoing projects, but it's not at the top of my list. But I would say within the next 2 to 3 years, it should be done.
Nice.
We'll see where it goes. But it's definitely everything, because of what life has been like for me. I think outside of the box all the time.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a bit exhausting and it scares some people, but so that book would definitely reflect outside of the box thinking around all of those topics. So yeah, like I said, I love talking about death, but I crave topics that other people don't talk about, just because I live so aware of how short life is, and how precious, and how so many of us spend our entire lives focused on things that really just don't matter at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I'm with you there. I'm with you there. You know, when you're talking about death in making it a positive thing that you're having this discussion because it's going to serve some value right down the road or now in terms of your level of comfort and peace and joy and that kind of thing as you go forward. I know a lot of times too, you talk to people like Stephen Covey Sr. had a funeral visualization exercise, right? And David Irvine is another that has that kind of a process. You imagine your funeral, you imagine who's there and what they're saying about you, and that kind of gives you the path of where you want to be, right? What you want your life to mean, right? Which I love that. Makes really good sense, right? At the end of it, when you die, did you meet up? Did you meet? Is it what you expected it would be, right? Did you deliver on the vision you had for your life, right? So I think it's exciting.
Yeah, if you really wanna push in the right direction, write your own obituary.
And that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Challenge.
Yes. And have you also imagined your own death, like how you're going to die?
No, I just pray every day that it's quick.
Just quick. All right, well, that's fair. That's a good thing.
I don't care how I go, God, just make it quick, whatever it is. So.
Ralph, have you ever had that thought?
Yes. You know, I get to see families firsthand that suffer through a long terminal illness and ones that pass away quite quickly. One is easier for the deceased, the other is easier for the family because they get a chance to grieve if the person passes away over months.
Right.
The other way, the family grieves very harsh and fierce if the person dies immediately. So, Eva, it's good for you. It might not be good for your daughter if you go quick, but you know, it's challenged both ways. You know, unfortunately, we're all born to die in some ways.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. There's definitely challenges to both. Yeah, I mean, you know, if someone's been sick for a long time, there's definitely a benefit to that, but also challenges. But then, yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, I have, I guess, all of the death that I have experienced has been sudden, and again, it may seem cruel to some, and so there's jokes in our family, which is why I say just make it quick. And knowing my dad, I just imagine he's like, because he would say that all the time, like, I don't care how I go, just make it quick. So I guess I get that from him. So knowing, I'm sure he's like, I got my wish.
Yeah, exactly.
How about you, Alan? What's your thoughts on that?
I actually have my kind of, I've got my plan for what my death is going to be. So it's quite a ways from now, actually. So yeah, it's just wait, February 15 in the year 2075.
Wow.
So I'm gonna have a pretty good life. Like, that's a long damn life. Yes. And the rest of the story is that I get this car to drive that comes into my possession. Actually, the story, as I told it, was Matt Furukawa gives me this car on my birthday because he just remembers I love this car, this Ford GT that he has. He gives me this car, and I take it out, and I'm gonna go on the Going to Sun Highway. And I go to this going on Sun Highway, and there happened to have some construction down. They're shutting the highway down. And so the guy I'm talking with, the flagman, he says, you know what? You're the last car I'm going to let through here. There's no traffic ahead of you. There's no construction equipment ahead of you. Man, this would be a really good opportunity to try this car out. And I said, thank you, John. I appreciate that. So then when he finally let me go, I just like pounded that thing. Shift first, second, third, fourth, 230, 240, 250 kilometers. Coming to the first turn, brake as hard as I can, downshift 2, hit the apex, stand on the accelerator again, shift, come to the next turn and do the downshifts and get it lined up and start putting the boots to her again. Going up 280, 270, or 290, 300 kilometers an hour. And I have this tightening in my chest. And my hands don't work anymore. And I go flying off the top, at the top of the pass there, 6,700 feet down to the bottom. So in that 27 seconds it takes to hit the bottom, then I have this glorious time with the wind rushing by and this beautiful head that I'm holding on to the steering wheel and just guiding it down to my demise with a big smile on my face. That's it.
Wow, that's pretty vivid.
That's very detailed. So very detailed.
Thanks. Anyways, that's my story. I think that'd be a really good way to die if I could pull that off. So, so
obviously you've seen Ford versus Ferrari then.
Oh yeah, I love that show. That was great. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So we are saying that with little people, especially, about having conversations about death at a level that's comfortable for them, at a level of sophistication that's comfortable for them, that you can have those conversations in advance, and that would be valuable for that little person for whatever's going to come later. And if in fact they're in that situation now, that it be as kind but as clear that mom's not coming back. This is how death works, kind of a thing, right? So yeah, that's kind of what we're saying would ease the trauma for a little person, right? And then also to be able to make it clear that there's no guilt on their side. They didn't cause this. This is nothing that they have any blame or guilt associated with. So
yeah, communication, connection, and I always say that with adults too. If there's ever a time for you to be selfish in life, it's when you're going through grief and you really need to communicate what you need. Children will do that, not always in a direct way, indirectly, and so to be aware of what are they telling you, whether it's through their words or through their actions, and just really listening, right? And connection is the key to healing. And so if you provide connection for those little people, for children that have gone through loss, that will be the greatest healer of all.
Yeah, no, makes sense. I know with that Bruce Perry, again, I'm a big fan of his. He wrote the book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Man, it's these stories of these incredible cases of abuse and neglect that these children go through. And the title story is A Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. This young woman has a child. She can't look after the child, so she gives it to mom. Mom is like 67 years old and morbidly obese and got diabetes and in really poor health. Mom lives like 10 months and dies. And then mom had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend knows nothing about kids. He knows about dogs. So raises the kid, puts him in the cage with the dogs and feeds him with the dogs and lets him out run around once in a while. And the rest of the time they go back in the cage. And this is like for 2 years. And so the kid, when they find him, he can't talk, he can't walk, he can't communicate in any way. He just basically stands in the corner and shrieks and throws shit at people, right? And so then he goes, Dr. Bruce Perry goes and kind of walks through the whole process and helps him by restoring the brain damage, the brain atrophy, I guess you might say, that occurred during that period of neglect, right? And the kid recovers and has like a normal life. What a story of hope, right? Story of terrible abuse, but a great story of hope, right? But one thing he talks about is the power of connection, that the power of connection makes, even if there's a kid who is being abused, as an example, having some adult in their life that cares about them outside of that makes a huge difference in their ability to endure that abuse or to recover from that abuse or to get out of that situation as well. So amazing that just those connections are so important. And it doesn't have to be, it could be even like Mary the bus driver who says, "Hey, Timmy, glad to see you." And it makes a big difference in little Timmy's life to get that, a friendly face, a friendly adult face in his life, kind of a thing. So, yeah.
Establish a helping relationship.
Yes.
That's what everybody, especially children, need.
Yes, exactly. Yes. We all need that some days, right, Ralph?
Absolutely.
Exactly. There's this police force, a couple of weeks ago, I read this. They had a situation where a police officer responded to a call. They didn't have to call Child Protective Services, but there's a little person that's obviously been very negatively impacted by this experience, right? Because somebody died or somebody got charged or whatever. So they had a process where they sent to the school district just a note that says, "Handle with care. Timmy Johnson, handle with care." No details, just, if Timmy needs a little bit of a rest today, if Timmy needs an extra hug, you don't talk about what happened. It's just you're available and aware that he might need a little bit more TLC today. And all of us at times need a handle with care day, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Throw one on your lapel there. Oh, yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. So any other words of wisdom? We're coming up to an hour. Man, that went quick. Any other words of wisdom before we wrap her up here?
Eva?
Ralph, do you have something you want to finish it off with?
Well, I have to say that I'm just honored and privileged to be invited to come on your show, Alan, and spend some time with Eva, get to know her better for sure. And it's just been a fun hour, actually. I had some anticipation coming into this, and you've made it so very comfortable, Alan.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that. For our next two shows that are coming up, both are going to be Lethbridge Family Services. Lethbridge Family Services is going to outline the programs they have. And if you want, you can ask us specific questions, and we'll have experts there who can give a shot at answering those or give you some guidance that way. So next 2 weeks, Lethbridge Family Services here at Jess TV, 7 p.m. on Wednesday nights. Thank you, and keep yourself well, and we will see you next week, hopefully.
You bet.